Chris Green.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The government asserts that it does not have a zero COVID policy or a zero COVID strategy. Well, if I accept that that is the case, it does seem as though it's a 0.1 COVID strategy. It's almost zero, but not quite. The government also at the same time accepts that the disease is endemic. And this is a very curious position where it's endemic, but the government is still trying to get the disease as close to zero as possible, which I would suggest requires pretty robust action from the government for the long term. Now, the original lockdown was to flatten the curve and protect the National Health Service. And even though the Nightingale hospitals were soon mothballed and then closed, that was not enough. Lockdown was then intended to enable test, track, trace, and isolate to get up to speed, and it must surely be there now. But again, that was not enough. Then it was to vaccinate the most vulnerable, the over 50s, or the most frail in our society. This is when the narrative was that the first dose would provide the vast majority of the protection required, far better than the influenza jab, and that the second jab at that point was only really to give a longevity to the resistance to COVID that would be required. Now, this should have, and the expectation was that at that stage, this would cut the overwhelming majority of deaths and hospitalizations. And this is the case, but still, that was not enough. Then it was to have everyone then given the second dose. That's almost been achieved. But as the Secretary of State announced a short while ago, the rollout of vaccinations now is intended for 21-year-olds. They can now sign up to get the vaccine. And again, this seems not to be enough. Now, in Bolton, we've been through a very difficult time. There's been an amazing amount of good work, hard work from so many locally. But with this new Indian variant, or variant of concern, we coped. And the impact on our health service was far less than the peak in January earlier this year. The NHS held up. And I believe it's quite clear now that the link between transmission, hospitalisation and death has been severed. And again, this is not enough to find our lockdown terminus. The narrative in recent weeks seems to have shifted from initially being about dealing with the Indian variant and seeing how risky and dangerous that was to the country. I think the evidence that's available at the moment shows we can cope with it. But the position seems to be shifted from dealing with the Indian variant and trying to understand it to now offering every adult 18 and over the first dose. As night follows day, this will still not be enough. The Health Secretary has been downplaying to some extent earlier this week the value of the first dose and promoting the value of the second dose. So should we now be anticipating a shift later in the year for every adult to be offered that second dose as well? That takes us well into September, perhaps a little beyond. We can see the rolling of the pitch for child vaccinations, compulsory vaccination of certain co-workers and perhaps others, the rolling of the pitch for... I'll give way to my honourable friend.
Honourable friend and neighbour in Greater Manchester. Could he reflect briefly for the House on his experience in Bolton and the declining case rates?
I thank my honourable friend for raising this important point. Transmission in Bolton is clearly on the way down. This demonstrates the actions taken and the effect and impact of this particular variant of concern, which had more impact in Bolton than almost anywhere else in the country. It's on the way down. This should give reassurance to the country that we can cope without a further extension to these measures which are having such an impact on so many people. We just think, for example, about the 5 million waiting list for hospital treatment, which would be far longer if people had better access to GPs to get those referrals. So when I ultimately think about what's going on, I was going to mention as well the G7 is suggesting a global vaccine programme as well. Would we have to wait until that's been delivered? Because until everyone is safe, no one is safe. So when the Prime Minister refers to a terminus, I fear he doesn't mean the end. I fear he's thinking more of a bus terminus, where we end one journey to start another, and there'll be another vehicle to impose another lockdown extension.